Our beautiful planet. Since the creation of social media, communications between scholars and researchers have strengthened. Exchanging knowledge and information is now the way of our world. For years, each and every one of us, every nationality, color, creed, and tribe, have researched for our own history to find out who we are as individuals. It's a hunger that we all have as human beings. And each and every one of us also comes from a beautiful history. Right there in the middle of our historical truths are stories that prove to me how beautiful our world truly is. And it took me to one of the coldest places on earth. But just like Africa, has many ancient stories. More of historical fact than far-fetched. The comparisons and similarities throughout our world, throughout every culture, is uncanny. And now living in a world that can't be censored, the sharing of knowledge and comparisons of ideas continues to grow. And the more connected we all become, the more questions and the more mysteries become answered. Russia, the largest country on the planet, may not be on your list of favorites as of today, but this vast country has a large portion of its land untouched by scientists outside of Russia. And since it's one of the coldest places in the world, not too many are willing to walk around the frigid snow taking samples. We now know Russia's ancient history is also rich in culture and historical fact. The heart of Russia, Siberia. Many different tribes and cultural groups help maintain this land for thousands of years. Siberia has to be one of the most vastest regions in Asia, sitting on the northern end, from the Ural Mountains to the west, Pacific Ocean to the east, Mongolia to its south, and the Arctic Ocean sitting at its northern borders. It's been a settlement for European Russians for over 800 years. The original tribes here were the hunters, fishermen, and herders. This is also a region with a magnificent creation story. Its naturally formed ice sculptures and beautiful formations. Historians have compared their culture with that of the Inuits of North America. A culture which had a deep respect and almost religious reverence for animals, believing that animals had spirits which can change forms at will. This would be just one of many of the mysterious tribes and cultures that call Siberia home. In a remote cave in the southeast of Siberia, archaeologists were excavating the Denisova cave. Alongside multiple human bones were remains of what scientists call the Denisovans, a larger species and one of the most mysterious cultures in Russia. To me, this was extremely interesting. I began to read and understand the origins of Russia. When I was younger, Russia always seemed to be a different kind of country and just has a different aura about it. So I always wanted to know the origins and the beginning of Russia's history. In the beginning, the mammoths roamed the earth, the entire land, shaping the mud with their tusks, The rainwater would fill in the indented pathways they walked through, creating the rivers and fill lakes where they laid. Then, the great god Atshabani came down from the sky and found that the world was covered with water. He sat on a turtle while his brother Chagan Shakuti dove back and forth into the water, bringing up mud each time. And each time he came up, the land was filled, and he continued to do this until there was an entire landmass. But before they could make way for the humans to live on the land again, Atshabani took the form of a giant bird and fought the huge evil serpent, Losi. This is another story of commonalities. So many commonalities amongst us. As I continued to read, I then stumbled across a similar story exactly the same as Noah's Ark. The beautiful story of a man named Nama, who was approached by the god Ugan, who told him to build a boat that would save him and his family from an incoming storm. Nama took his wife, 3 sons, a few other families, and some animals. They sailed the seas as the waters filled the world. After Atshabani and Shangan Shukuti defeated the Losi, the land was now safe again for humans to thrive. Years after reaching land, Nama was an elder and reaching death. His wife told him if he kills all the people that arrive with him along with the animals, then he would be the king of the dead in the afterlife. His sons rejected. Argument ensued. Nama eventually killed his wife and took his sons up with him to heaven, where they disappeared into the stars, becoming part of the constellation. Beautiful story. Beautiful story. Reminds me of Noah and also has similarities to the ending of the story of Enoch. So I just continued to read. I learned that shamans played a serious role in the Siberian religion. They were known to have abilities to travel between worlds by flying or climbing the Great World Tree. And through ceremonies and being in a trance state, they were able to communicate with the spirit world. After I learned and read the origins of Russia's culture, I learned that they too had a connection with the stars. And Russia also at one point lived alongside giants. Ancient Believers of Kivan Adayors. Sadyatagor, the giant. The name's true meaning means great mountain. He was so large, the natives believed the earth couldn't hold his weight or size. The Bogadir Ilya was the only man to challenge Sadyatagor. Before riding off to face the great giant, he was warned by the pilgrims not to face the humongous creature. But Ilya refused to be swayed and continue his journey. On the road, he spots the giant sleeping on a giant horse. He struck the giant 3 times with his mace, but the blows had no effect because the giant was still asleep. He unconsciously grabs Ilya and puts him in his pocket. When he awoke, they began to speak and became friends. He learns that the giant is Sadyatagor, and they continue their journey together. They share stories, hunt, and protect one another. They eventually arrive to a hill with a giant stone coffin. They both have a premonition that the stone coffin is for the giant. They walk up to it, and Ilya climbs inside. It's way too big for a normal-sized human. Sadyatagor climbs inside, and it fits him perfectly. The lid begins to slide over on its own, sealing the coffin without either of their acknowledgement. Before it does, Sadyatagor passes part of his universal energy to Ilya through his breath, giving Ilya the strength of the gods. This birthed a culture among the Belarusians, who worship the giant as a god till today. Sadyatagor is just one of many of the giants of Russian and Siberian history. There were more in North Siberia and the Anaba Plateau, the ancient iron fish floating in the water, the shaman not shaman, the great giant of the Tungus people, the Falichie, the 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 giant of the Tungus Before the introduction of Judaism in the 6th century, each continent held its own faith, its own creation story, and contact with their creator. Also before the 6th century, we were assisted by men and women who were of large stature, who helped us build living quarters, temples for spirituality, and was the first to learn the alchemy of forging weapons. After the 6th century and the spread of Judaism, the Catholic Church became the same power as today's governments and made it its business to wipe away the histories that didn't include Jesus. Millions of texts throughout the world were burned, and the history was lost among the people. South Nigeria, the heart of Africa. A land of resilience, triumph, and a beautiful history. But because its history runs so deep, there are many layers unknown to the public. The Kingdom of Benin. There are a number of people who will say they have no reason to vacation to Benin. But for those who have, then you know in the heart of the city, there lies a statue of a huge man, carrying a palm tree by its roots. The story behind this landmark is based on historical fact. Idabord Hanran, the great giant. Born in the 1500s, he was born destined to become the next Oba, or ruler of Benin. But Idabord was a strong baby, and during his birth, he hadn't shed one tear. But because he didn't shed a tear, he was rejected the role of the next ruler. As part of the culture for his father's kingdom, a child that doesn't cry at birth cannot be king or queen. His brother, Asige, was born a few hours after, and he was immediately granted to be the next Oba. As the years went, Idabord learned of being denied the throne at birth. A sense of resentment set in for his brother. He would constantly antagonize and go to war with Asige. Socially, this would weigh on the family, and before his father died, he tried to mend the conflict between his sons by carving out dukedoms for both of the brothers. Idabord at the time was the Duke of Udo. Udo was a small village not too far from Benin. Idabord may have felt this was an attempt to isolate him, because he was rarely in Udo, embracing his role as Duke. He became more focused on waging war against Asige and set plans to kill his brother. By the time they were adults, Idabord had grown into a full giant, almost 18 feet, and was a known conqueror who fought countless wars and hammered many adversaries. He became popular throughout Benin, known for ripping palm trees smooth out of the ground with his bare hands. And he swept the ground with palm fronds and cleared paths in the most difficult and remote places to travel. You would think this story may be a fairy tale, but the Edo historical traditional cultural heritage records show that Idabord was a giant and a great competitor. I also learned that after the death of the king, Idabord's father, Asige was made king of South Benin. The people of Benin assumed that this would bring the brothers closer together, but the two seemed unreasonable and unable to come to mutual agreement. Idabord refused to respect his brother as the king, and eventually moved back to Udo, where he trained his army and also his new magical prowess. He rallied his army and stormed the capital of Benin. It's said that before Idabord left to move to Udo, he put spells on Asige's coronation beads, which drove his brother mad for days. Once the war began, it went on to be the bloodiest in Benin's history, with a lot of damage given by Idabord, but Asige became the victor by beating his gigantic brother. And out of shame, Idabord transformed into a creature and walked into the great lake of Odigi, which he never returned. Asige became Benin's finest Oba, and made history when he was the first from his land to establish close friendships with the Portuguese. He granted his mother, Queen Ida, who also went down in history as a great warrior and queen, the role of Ioba, which became a new privileged administrative role, and forged a new, highly enhanced metal, a copper steel like bronze, which is unbreakable, kind of like the vibranium of Wakanda. This metal has become the pride of Benin until today. Over the years, if I've learned nothing else, I've learned that in some way or another, we are all connected. No matter our country, our region, or our race, almost every creation story of our world, no matter the continent, have numerous commonalities among each other. The only thing different are the names. Could it be that each and every futuristic possibility has been altered or damaged because of the actions of the Catholic Church in the 16th century? Did they alter multiple possibilities for countless futures? That I cannot say, but I can say that we are all connected. One small example are 3 separate petroglyphs from 3 separate countries throughout the world. Here we have India, Mexico, and Siberia, Russia, depicting the same deity, but different names. But the only thing we can do at this point is do extensive research on our history and of our ancestors. These actions will undoubtedly bring us closer to the truth. Beautiful Egypt. We think we know it all when it comes to Egypt, but new discoveries are made every day. Every religion has their magical deities and a magnificent history. The year 820 AD. The Sultan al-Rashid al-Mamun, descendant of the great al-Rashid of the Arabian Nights, was the first to rediscover the pyramids in the modern era. During that time, the pyramids were still covered in white limestone. He was told by locals who were in authority there at that time that the pyramids were built by the Shaddai, who were followers of the great god Horus. Even during that time, he had no idea who the Shaddai were. We all know that giants originated in the time of the Watchers, but it's rarely spoken of is how giants ended up all over the world. I believe this started with the great exodus of the giants who left from the city of Canaan. The connection with these giants and humans in other regions will have a strong connection, but we'll get into that later. The great god Horus, god of the skies. There was a time in human history when our ancestors lived amongst these wonderful beings. And now today what we call religious groups or cults were formed strongly back then. And this was the time of the Shaddai. It's said that it's possible that the Shaddai came from the city of Ad, whose king was also known to be a giant, and also the king of the lost Arabian city Aram, the Aram of the Pillars. And in today's religious book for the Muslims, the Quran, an account which is mentioned in Surah 89, he is referred to as a giant. Most of these accounts could be found in the Great Arabian Compilation, which speak of the time of the world before the Great Flood. It explains that the people of Ad were giants, and Shaddad, the king of Ad, was most likely the one who built the monuments for Danshur with the stones that he had carved out during the time of his father. Before this, the giant Harit had begun construction, and a separate giant by the name of Quaftorum placed the secrets inside the pyramids of Danshur. This giant Quaftorum might be the most important, because it says that in an attempt to imitate what he had done before, he founded the city of Dendera. These ancient texts also go on to tell us that Nquaris, the first king of Egypt, after the flood, with his companions, built monuments, erected high towers, and executed wonderful works, and that the great city of Memphis was the work of a later set of giants, who worked for King Mishram, another giant. And I quote, Admin was a great giant. He ordered the quarrying of rocks and their transportation to build pyramids, as had been done in former times, beautiful planet. For thousands of years, verbal and written experiences, these wonderful adventures, written by our ancestors, tells us the confrontation, contribution, and collaboration that humans had with these magnificent beings. Ethiopia, as ancient as it gets. Some believe this is where the true origins of man lies. In 2015, researchers discovered a human skeleton inside of a remote cave in Ethiopia. The skeleton turned out to be more than 4,500 years old. This was an amazing find for researchers, knowing how deep Ethiopia's history runs, but there's no better validation than ancient human remains. This was important because it showed the trade between Asia and Africa thousands of years ago. This area is known as the Harla region of Ethiopia, located just outside Dire Dawa, which we now know is the second largest city in the country. Though Dire Dawa has now been modified into a modern city, the city's historical reverence runs deep. Fact being that this was once the city of the giants. The finds of these remains is a continuing occurrence that continues to come to light year by year, with findings in places like Europe, Britain, France, Spain, Italy, Germany, and Russia, the Middle East, Israel, Egypt, Syria, Iraq, and Iran, Africa, Australia, New Zealand, and way to the Far East in China, Japan, Malaysia, and the Philippines, all areas in which giants have been discovered. The validation of giants just gives validation to other stories in our religious texts, children's books, and stories and movies which have been adopted from those original stories. Our beautiful planet.